very much, but the truth is, Baruch Shechibanti the Das Gedolim, I thought about it even before. So what is this idea of the connection between Sefer Devarim and Breishit? Where did it come from? So one idea I think it came from is one of my favorite ideas I heard from Rav Soloveitchik. I heard in the name of Rav Soloveitchik, based on a Gemara in Brachos that says, Arba Dvarim tzrichim chizuk. There are four things that need chizuk. One of those four things that need chizuk is Talmud Torah. Rav Soloveitchik always said that this is one of the reasons that on Simchas Torah, when we're finishing off Vizos HaBracha, we don't just celebrate Vizos HaBracha with the Gala Kiddush, but we go straight into reading Breishit, because we don't just celebrate the finishing, but how do we celebrate Torah? Tefillah, Talmud Torah, Tzrichim Chizuk. We have to continue moving on. We finish Vizos HaBracha, we go straight into Breishit. Chamisha Chumshei Torah being one unit, the assumption is that there's a Chatima Mein Pticha, there are two bookends here, there's some sort of connection here. And I said, Mili B'dichuta, a very close Talmud of mine, his name is Michael Brandwine. He was a Rosh of sports in Camp Mosheva Ennismore when I was the Rav of the camp there. And he got up in front of the whole camp, and he said, everyone look at the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. What's the first letter of Chamisha Chumshei Torah? A bet. He said, what's the last letter? Remember this? He says, what's the last letter? Einei Kol Yisrael. Lamed. He goes, Torah is full of lave. Rachmana liba bai. When you're learning Torah, it's got to be full of heart. Full of heart. But he said, him being the director of the sports program, it's also bet lamed. It's ball. He says, when you play ball, you have to be full of lave. It's got to be full of heart. So on a certain level, when I was thinking about this connection, the question is, what is this connection of lave, of the Breishit? Maybe a little bit deeper than the bet and the lamed. But to understand these connections, and I came up some drash, but using the Rishonim to understand this connection. And I came up with 5 different approaches. There are probably many more. But with the short time we have tonight, try to come up with 5 approaches. And really to look at one of the questions, and the main idea we're going to have is one of the questions that the Rishonim ask. The Rishonim ask that there's a name of either describing Am Yisrael or the Ribono Shalom that we don't find until the end of Sefer Devarim. And that name is Yeshurun. In the first couple sources in front of you in Parak Lamed Bet, it's Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat. It doesn't say Vayishman Yisrael Vayivat. It says Vayishman Yeshurun. They fattened up the Yeshurun and then they kicked. Or in Parak Lamed Gimel, Ein Ka'el Yeshurun Rochev Shamayim Be'ezrecha B'gavato Shchakim. Or coming in Vizos HaBracha Vayihi Vishurun Melech B'tasef Rashiyam. Says the Rabbeinu Bachai, this is the first time and the only time that we see this concept of Yishurun. And Rabbeinu Bachai in the third source in front of you says, this is the first time. Why here? So we're going to answer, or at least partially, some of the thoughts that we have. What is this concept of Yishurun? So the first idea of Yeshurun is by the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel that says it's referring to the Ribono Shalom, Ein Ka'el Yeshurun, and it comes from the concept of Ashuras HaShechina. Ein Ka'el Yeshurun. You want to know what is Yeshurun referring to? It's talking about Ashuras HaShechina, God's divine presence. That you had that ability coming into Eretz Yisrael, and instead, Vayishman Yeshurun, you fanned up and you kicked out God. You said, Kochi v'otzem yadi asali et hachayel hazeh. You don't need God. In the contrast of what it should be, of Einei Hashem Elokecha ba, which leads into the second interpretation, which we're going to focus on more, the concept of Rabbeinu Bachai and the Ramban that says there is a Yashar, Yeshurun, language of Yashar, straight, divine providence with the Ribono Shalom, as opposed to the other nations, Ein Ka'el Yeshurun. The other nations, they have certain Malachim, Sarimala, they have to have, you've got mail. You have to have a certain connection, right? There's got to be a certain administrator there. When it comes to Hashras HaShechina, which we've experienced now, from Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, being in the Tziladim, the Hamnuta, together in the Sukkah, there's this Hashras HaShechina that we have, Ein Ka'el Yeshurun, which is the obvious connection to Breishit, Bara Elokim et HaShamayim et HaAretz, the whole purpose of creation, L'chvodo barati, L'chvodo yitzarti, Amzu yatzarti, L'tliati yisaperu. The whole concept of creation is this Hashras HaShechina, is L'galot Kvod Malchuto. Very simple, very strong connection that the end of Yeshurun is talking about the Ribono Shalom, Hashras HaShechina coming to Eretz Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu. At least seeing it, we have the ability of Hashras HaShechina, the end of Chagei Tishrei, all about coming into Koshalai Pridaschem, this unbelievable Hashras HaShechina through Sukkot, and leading into Breishit, which is all about God creating the world and our job, Legalot Kvod Malchuto, in this world. The second Perush, which we started saying, is that Yeshurun comes from the language of Yashar. Yeshurun, from the language of Yashar, being straight. In this, some of the Achronim point out, first already, the Ibn Ezra already says that it could be from the language of Yashar. But here it's talking about the Torah. The Ksava Kabbalah of Mecklenburg says that it's possible, Lefisha Torah Nikret Yashar. As it says, Halohi Ktuval Sefer Yashar. And mitzvot are called Yisharim, possibly say in Tehillim every Shabbat. Pikudi Hashem Yisharim Misam Chelev. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense now. We're Makabel the Torah. Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Morasha Kilat Yaakov. In the Psukim here in Parshat Azinu, also talking about Yisovevenu Yivonenu, talking about Kabbalah SaTorah. Makes sense that Yisharim are Mekabli Torah v'Shomrei Pikudim. The Torah is Yashar, and it expects us to be a Am Yeshurun, that we should be Yashar. Now what's interesting is that this happens on two different planes. One plane is that we ourselves should be Yashar with each other. And that is what the Meshech Chochmah, not in the sources in front of you. The only time, I don't know if you noticed it, we just finished Yom Kippur. Ki ata salchan liYisrael u'machalan l'shiftei Yeshurun. The only time in the Nusach L'Tfilah, the Meshech Chochmah points out, Ki ata salchan is referring to the Averot of Ben Adam HaMakom. The Avera of the Chet HaEgel versus that machalan l'shiftei Yeshurun is talking about which Chet? The one of Mechiras Yosef, Yeshurun, from the anti-Yashrut. Being able to know how to deal with each other. That's one level of Yashar here, that definitely at the end of the Torah, it's talking about coming into Eretz Yisrael, knowing how to deal with each other. That's one level of Yashar. And the obvious connection to Breishit is what? What is Sefer Breishit called by the Netziv in his introduction? Sefer HaYashar. Calls the Sefer HaYashar in his introduction, quoting from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, from Rabbi Yochanan, says Sefer Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Shinekru Yisharim, and he asked the obvious question, why are our Avos called Yisharim? Why are they not called Chasidim, Tzadikim? And he explains that the Shevach of Yashar is knowing how to deal with people who are far away, dealing with Umot HaOlam, who are Afilu Ovdei Elilim Mechuarim, but they still knew how to treat with them with respect. Obviously a very worthwhile read when we get to Sefer Breishit. This Yashrut on these two planes, number one is how to deal with each other, and obviously how to deal with Umot HaOlam. And that's what Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, in the last source in front of you, talks about this concept of Yashar, that we should be Yashar, that's the ideal. Haba l'chyot chayei chova ruchaniyim u'musarim shleimim einam nelatz b'echrach levater al simchat ha'osher artzi. He talks about how to be involved in the world. Ela hadarga l'yonah shel musariyut yichola lador b'kfifa achat im kol midah gusha shel osher artzi. This concept of being able to be Yashar, being able to go and know within both within Am Yisrael, being within the Sukkah, knowing how to deal with each other in the Sukkah. Sukkot being the holiday of the Shivim Ha'umot Ha'olam, being able to know a universal holiday. That's the Sefer Yashar of Breishit. But also know that in the Sukkah, as the Zohar says, it's what? It's Dafka with an Am Yisrael. It's a dialectic, but at a certain level, that's the Yashar being able to work together. The approaches that I really want to focus on are the next two. Next three, really. Yashar, or Yeshurun, could also mean Ri'iyah. Ibn Ezra says that Yeshurun is the language of Ri'iyah. Quotes from the Pasuk, famous Shweki song. It's actually a Pasuk before Shweki came along. Ki merosh surim erenu, umikvaot ashurenu. Explains the Rabbeinu Bachai in the next source in front of you. It's the concept of Ri'iyah. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu now using the language of Yeshurun? Al Shema Ri'iyah, I'm reading in Rabbeinu Bachai, Devarim Perek Lamed Bet Pasuk Tevav. Al Shema Ri'iyah, Shera'u Kvod HaShechina Ayin Ba'ayin B'matan Torah. Ki inyan shekatuv u'marei Kvod Hashem ke'ish ochel et rosh hahar. Ulefikach achar shizkir matan Torah, she'amar Yisrael v'venu yivonenu, hizkir miyad b'shem Yeshurun. Right afterwards, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, miyad vayi b'shur melech. Ein kael Yeshurun. Look at you, look what you saw in Har Sinai. Yicholim atem la'id alav she'ein kamou. This is all part of the Tochacha. Explains Rabbeinu Bachai, the Shira and the Tochacha. Look what you're going to do. Look how you're going to slip up. Look at the responsibility of what you have that you saw. And that's why 3 times here it's called Yeshurun. Ra'u kvod hashchina. And what did you do? Bo'et bo. Vayishman Yeshurun. You have that ability. The responsibility of kvod hashchina, of seeing what you have, and instead you fall short. I would say that this is true for the guys who are here tonight also. Many of you guys, even though you're in the generation now that many of your parents actually had your year in Israel, 2 years in Israel, but there are many people that don't have this unbelievable opportunity of learning in Eretz Yisrael. You don't have that ability. We take it as a given. Of course you're going to come. Right? Some people have that mahalach that, okay, I'll turn from when I come to Eretz Yisrael. Everyone knows, everyone's read the different books, the different research. If not, I can tell you about the books. I'll tell you first-hand testimony. But it's being able to understand the responsibility that we have in Eretz Yisrael, seeing the Kvod HaShechina. How does this connect to Sefer Breishit? Sefer Breishit, concept of Breishit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. If you turn the page, I believe very much that if you have with Adam Arishon, I didn't put this part on the sources as much, but Adam Arishon also had this concept of Ri'iyah. Hashem put him into Gan Eden, where there was great things to see. Eitz nechmad v'mareh v'tov l'ma'achal. What was unique about the Gan Eden experience, similar to Matan Torah? Vayitalech b'toch hagan. Vayishmad kol Hashem mitalech b'toch hagan. Similar to the what? Just like by Matan Torah, b'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot, where Chazal say that they saw what they heard what they see, all the senses were all mixed in together. So too the Gan Eden. Adam Arishon was able to see that type of experience. He was ki'ilu seeing God. And that's what the Medrash talks about. That Adam Sofeu mabit misofa olam v'ad sofo. Adam Rishon had this ability of the same Ri'iyah of this Yeshurun, of the Sefer HaYashar. He had this awesome responsibility that we have. That we think that we have an ability, at least some level, to see the Ribono Shalom in our lives. The question is, what do you do with it? What do you do with that? Do you fall into the Eitz Nechmad and you shortchange yourself? That's the question. That's the end of Sefer Devarim. It's the beginning of Breishit, and that's the question of Ayek. What are you going to do with your kochot? What are you going to do with your abilities? Or are you going to say, okay, I had this ability, but okay, I wanted to party a little too much, I wanted to chill out a little too much? Or is it a matter of being more sophisticated and using those kochot and understanding to step up? Adam Arishon fell to the trap of Eitz Nechmad and he hid from it. And the Rebbeinu Shalom said, I'm sorry, you didn't step up to the responsibility. The second interpretation of Re'iyah is, if you look at the end of Devarim, there's a tremendous amount of Re'iyah. If you look at it, there's Moshe Rabbeinu coming and only seeing Eretz Yisrael. It's 5 or 6 times. At the end, there's Re'iyah. But the last part of Sefer Devarim, the last pasuk, L'kol hayad chazaka l'chol amara gadol, asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael. Says Rashi here, shenisao libo lishmor aluchot le'eneihem. This is how the last Rashi in the Torah, he lifted his heart to break the luchot for them to see le'eneihem. Shene'emar v'ashabirim le'eneichem. V'yiskima da'at HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'da'ato shene'emar asher shibarta yeyasher kochacha sheshibarta. The question comes, why is Rashi bringing this right now? Why didn't Rashi bring this in Parshas Ki Tisa by the Shmiras Haluchos? What is this Yeshirun of Re'iyah? What's the message for us? Rav Shechter quotes in a Sefer Mipnei Arav from Rav Meir Shapir Melublin, based on a midrash. And I brought it here, we'll read it inside together. It says, Ita b'midrash ala pasuk psal lecha, vayomer Hashem al Moshe psal lecha shnei luchot avanim. Why? Sheluchot harishonot were smashed. Why? Shenidnu b'pumbi. Because they were given in a very ostentatious way. V'chol ha'am ro'im et hakolot v'et halapidim. A big thunder, sound, and lightning show. And therefore, as a result, says the Midrash, Sholta bahem ayin hara. The Re'iyah, there was an ayin hara. Therefore, nishtabru aluchot. V'kan b'luchot shniyot, I'm going to rectify it. Amar le HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, ein lecha yafeh min hatzniut. There's nothing better than a certain amount of privacy. Shenemar uma Hashem doresh mimach, ki masot mishpat ravad chesed v'tznei alechet, etc. As for Meir Shapir Milublin, the obvious question. V'tzorich lahavin. Im kein ma'atam natan HaKadosh Baruch Hu et haluchot rishonot b'farhesed. V'chi lo hevin mirosh shekayemet efsharut shetishlo b'en ayin hara. Fantastic question. If the whole reason why luchot rishonot are smashed is because of ayin hara, so why did the Rebbeinu Shalom give the Torah in such a grandiloquent way? Just what? Give it at the beginning in its tznius way. What's going on? What's the message? Why does it have to be done? Yeshurun, that we have einecha. What's the message? Explains Rav Meir Shapir Melublin, v'nireh levayer bazeh. Dinei b'havdalah. Anu maskirim kama sugei havdalot shonim. By Havdalah, every single Motzei Shabbat, we say different types of separations. We say Amavda ben Kodesh l'chol. We say Ben Or l'choshech. Ben Yisrael l'Amim. Ben Yom HaShvi l'Shesh Yemei HaMaaseh. V'inei chiluk gadol yesh ben ha'avdalah shebein Or l'choshech levein Havdalah shebein Kodesh l'chol. What's the difference between the separation between night and day and holiness versus profanity or not being sacred? Explains that what? There's a concept called Havdalah Gluya and Havdalah Nisteret. Havdalah Gluya is it's clear as day. Barur Kashemesh. Shakol Yicholim L'rot U'Lakir B'chush. Shafila Behemot V'Achayot Makirim Et Havdalah Zeh. Everybody knows when's the nighttime, when's the daytime. Many of us who've slept in the sukkah, it's very, very clear when it's going to be nighttime, when it's daytime. Unfortunately, a lot of times you get up very early, especially if you sleep in the sukkah with your kids. You get up nice and early, and you're like, I think it's still nighttime. Just go back to sleep. It's still nighttime. I have a sister-in-law who tries to put her kids down like at 4:30. It's nighttime, right? Even the kids, they know. It's not nighttime, I'm telling you. People know. Animals know. Not that my nephews and nieces are animals, right? There is a clear distinction. But everybody knows there's a difference between between Or and Choshech. However, between Kodesh and Chol, right? He went on before the however, he said Barchi Nafshi, even the Prachim know the difference. Very nice. Ma she'en kein Havdalah between Kodesh and Chol. He Havdalah Nisteret. It's not as clear. It's a little more vague. Shelo hakol yicholim lavchin beinayim v'yudu. Not everybody knows this distinction. He quotes the Yalkut Shimoni on the Akedah Yitzchak. The Yalkut Shimoni, when it says Bayom HaShlishi in the Akedah, Vayisa Avraham et einav vayeret hamakom merachok. The Yalkut Shimoni quotes a pasuk in Hosea of Yichayenu miyomayim. But Bayom HaShlishi Yikimenu v'nichyeh lefanav. Quotes the Medrash quotes a lot of Bayom HaShlishis by Yosef, Bayom HaShlishi of Matan Torah, Bayom HaShlishi of the Meraglim, a lot of Bayom HaShlishis of Yonah, a lot of Yom HaShlishis. And in this case, in this context, says the Yalkut Shimoni Bayom HaShlishi in the bold Vayisa Avraham et einav Vayaret hamakom merachok. Asked the Midrash, what did he see? Ma Ra'a anan kashur bahar. He saw a cloud that's tied to a mountain. Omar, Domeli, Sha'ato makom. That's Vayaret hamakom merachok. That must be where I have to do Akedah Yitzchak. Sha'ato makom. Shamar li HaKadosh Baruch Hu lakriv et Benisha. Amar li Yitzchak, he turned to Yitzchak. Roeh ata ma shani roeh? Do you see what I see? Amar lehe. He says, yeah, I see what you see. Amar l'shnei na'arav. Ro'im atem ma shani roeh? Do you see what I see? Amru lo. No, we don't see it. The Medrash ends off. Amar hol v'achamor ino roeh. V'atem inchem ro'im shvuv po im hachamor. You turn the page. What's Pshat in the Medrash? Explains Rav Meir Shapir Milublin in the name the Drasha of Rav Soloveitchik on Yom Ha'atzmaut, quoting Rav Meir Shapir Milublin. V'kavanat HaMidrash lomar Shirak Avram v'Yitzchak yivchinu she'esham ha'kedusha b'Har HaMoriah u'shnei ha'avadim lo yivchinu b'kedusha ki Havdalah azot ben kodesh l'chol hi lo gluya l'kol. When it comes to kedusha, it's not as clear at times. It's not as discernible. You have to work at it much more. And therefore, there was a question. What was the question when we say Amavdil ben Yisrael Amim? What type of Havdalah are we supposed to be? Jews, non-Jews. How are we supposed to get along? How is it supposed to be? Finishing up Sukkot, Shivim Amim, being together, universal holiday, particularistic. Which is it? What am I supposed to be doing here? How am I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be wearing the right clothes to be able to? I have to make sure I have the I-6 or I-6-7. I have to be with the times. I have to know what's going on. I have to be there. I have to dress properly. What's the relationship here? Hamavdil ben Yisrael Amim. What am I supposed to be doing? Is it supposed to be a Havdalah Gluya v'nikeret l'kol? Is it supposed to be clear that your name is not Jeremy, but it's Yirmiyahu, right? Yeah, just call me David. I'm not David. Call me David, right? All of these things. We all, Anthony. I'm not Yonatan. I'm Toby. right? Just call me Tony. Is it what am I? Who am I? What's the Havdalah? Or no. It's supposed to be Havdalah Misteret. Right? Many people are medakdek with mitzvah when you go outside, not even clear that they're Jews. This explains what Meir Shapiro Lublin was the message of giving the Torah in such a bombastic, very, very public nature, even though there was going to be shalto with an ayin har. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah and said, you are different. You have to have a Havdalah Gluya. You have to know you're different. It's got to be clear that you're different. At the end of Sefer Devarim, Rashi points out, you know how you have to end Sefer Devarim? I always thought it's Yasher Koach Sheshibarta Taluchot. For years I thought that the Pshat and Rashi, still could be, is that it's an introduction to the end of Sefer Devarim, which is the Chaye Eretz Yisrael, going into Yoshua. There's a transition now of thinking it's no more Hanagani seat. There's no more of the Luchot Rishonot. Yasher Koach Sheshibarta Taluchot. Vayomer Hashem Moshe Psal Lecha. You now have to be a shutaf. You're going to be in Eretz Yisrael. Hazorim b'dima, birina yiksaru. For many, many years, that's what I thought. Maybe that was the pshat, what Rashi was coming to tell us. But maybe there's a different pshat here. Rashi's telling us it's not only the end of Chamisha Chumshei Torah leading into Sefer Yoshua, but looking at Chamisha Chumshei Torah of Chatima Me'en Pticha. You have to know to end the Torah. What do you have to do? Yasher Koach Sheshibarta Deluchot. You have to know that when I'm giving you the Torah, what do you have to know? Yishurun. You have to know that it's got to be a Havdalah Gluya. It's got to be clear, and if not, I got to break the Luchot for you to know that there's got to be a clear difference. A Havdalah Gluya. Come Sefer Breishit. What is Breishit about? If not about the concept of Havdalot at the beginning. Bereshit, the word Bereshit doesn't just mean in the beginning. The word Bet Reish Aleph in Tanakh means to cut. If you look in Sefer Yoshua. Already at the beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying there are Havdalot, and you have to be able to know how to choose between all these Havdalot. You have to know, I'm going to cut Shamayim Va'aretz, and what do you have to do? You have to know how to make the right decisions, to know who you are, to be able to connect Shamayim Va'aretz back. All of Breishit is being able to say that to make these choices. The first Rashi, Omer Rabbi Yitzchak lo yat tzarich la'atchilat haTorah el me'achodesh hazeh lachem. Shehi mitzvah rishona shenitzdu ba Yisrael. The Havamin of Rashi is clear as what? Since the Torah, the previous Rashi, is given for Am Yisrael, a Goy learns Torah's Chayav Mita. So it's given for Am Yisrael. So if it's given for Am Yisrael, how do I know what's the rule book? The rule book are the mitzvahs. So that's where it should start from. Because the Torah is given, Sefer Yashar, it's called for Am Yisrael. Why does it start with Breishit? Uma tam patach be-Breishit, mishum koach masa v'gil amo, latet lahem nachlat goyim, shim yomru mot ha'olam liYisrael listimatem, shekavashtem artzot shiva goyim heim omrim lahem kol haaretz, shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu hi, hu bara v'nana l'asher yashar be'inav, v'rtzonot nana lahem u'v'rtzonot nalav lahem v'natnu lanu. The Rashi here is dealing with that what? Rashi's telling us, how do we have to deal with this concept of Hamavdil ben Yisrael Amim? What do you deal with? Eretz Yisrael from the beginning. From the beginning. Some of you might have listened to the House of Commons last night. In the Sukkah. In the Sukkah I was listening. To the facts. To the facts. What humanity. A lot of different things. How do I deal with this? How do I deal with it? Some of the facts sounded good. Obviously, a lot of twist. A lot of twist, if you were listening to it. you're listening to him, how do I deal with that? How am I going to be able to say that? What were they saying? If you listen to MK after MK after MK, they're saying Am Yisrael has to have a higher moral fiber. How could it be factually that so many people died in Gaza? Of course, there were so many twists that they just went straight to the numbers. But what they were saying is that there's a certain Havdalah here. And of course, they're not going to read this Rashi and say, oh, it must be that Eretz Yisrael belongs to us. That's not the point of the Rashi. The point of the Rashi is telling us the Havdalah Gluya, being able to say Ivri Anochi, to be able to know within ourselves what the right messages are. To end off, one other message. It's possible that the connection between the end of Sefer Devarim and Breishit and how we deal with Chagei Tishrei is actually just reading the Pshat. We know of Sefer Devarim by Etchanan. Moshe Rabbeinu wants to come to Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu, and you read the Psukim, Lo Kam Navi, Moshe Rabbeinu, this unbelievable Navi, this unbelievable Moshe Rabbeinu, B'chol Beiti Nemanhu. You read it, and you almost read the end of the Torah, and your heart is broken. Your heart is broken. Not only that you know the Midrash that Moshe totally was mocking himself, but you just read the Psukim and you know the concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a certain element of Riyah Ta'aretz. But you feel guilty. What am I, Ari Cutler here? Who are you to be able to walk these Arba Amos in Eretz Yisrael and get a mitzvah when Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't Zoche to be here? You read here, you say you almost start crying. And you almost start crying that the Chazal that say that when Moshe died, that they cried more for Aaron than Moshe. You just feel like, oh my goodness, as the reader, as Moshe Rabbeinu, you read it and you feel distraught. You feel distraught. Without all the Chazals, without all of, very important, it's called Moshe Eved Hashem, 100%. No one's saying that Moshe didn't have a tziduk hadin. No one's saying that. When you just read the Psukim, you feel, if you're with Moshe Rabbeinu, he's your Rebbe. And what do you want for your Rebbe is for his dream. He's mitava, he's mitpalel, every single one. Like in modern day, you would say he went to the Hakotel 515 times and created all these different tikkun. You can imagine it. Everything. And he didn't get that. I think the message might be based on the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. That says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give the Sachar for the Torah, and the Umot HaOlam jumped up and said, okay, I'm ready, give it to us. And after a whole long discussion from Bet to Gimel and Avodah Zarah, at the end, the Gemara says, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, you want the mitzvah? I'll give you an easy mitzvah. What's the easy mitzvah called? Sukkah. What does the Gemara say? That already Omeid Barosh Kago, Maktir Alav, the son of Tkufat Tammuz. And what happens? It's too hot for them on the Rosh Gag. And what does the Gemara say? Right? The Gemara says not only do they leave it, but they kick the sukkah down. Because the Gemara asked, but even us, we're mitzdayer patim in a sukkah. What's the big difference? The difference is that they kick the sukkah. And I read in one of the drushes of Rav Shagar where he explained that the difference is not only how you're mikabel the mitzvot. Here we're talking about to do Simchat Torah and everything that we've talked about, but it's also how to deal when you're rejected. It's how to deal when things don't exactly go your way. The end of Sefer Devarim, you're reading it, all you wanted is it, come on. He deserves it. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Eved Hashem, and he knows how to deal with it even if he didn't get what he wanted. Sukkot is the idea of the difference between being able to know how to not be boy, to be Vayishmani Shurun, the anti of Vayivatim, be Itab Sukkah, that the Umot HaOlam did. This is the message, obviously, in the most clear case of Cain and Hevel in Breishit. When bringing Korbanot, and Hevel brought and Cain brought, and what happens? Right, Hashem didn't turn or didn't accept the Korban, and he went crazy. If I had to bring this approach of this connection, I believe, and with this I'll conclude, is that the end of Sefer Devarim and the end of Chagei Tishrei, on one level, we're enamored. We started off with the Hashras HaShechina. We started off with the Sukkot Tishvu Ke'in Teduru. Rav Shagar quoted a story by Rav Shlomo Karbach, quotes Rav Levi Yitzchak Mibarditchev, that a woman came to Rav Levi Yitzchak Mibarditchev and said, "My husband left me." And he said, "No, why?" And he says, she goes, "I think because I'm not as beautiful as I used to be." So Rav Levi Yitzchak Mibarditchev says, "No, what are you telling her?" So she says, "I think, yeah, in Achinami, I'm not as beautiful as I used to be, but I wish he would remember that beautiful wedding date that we had." How does he not remember that beautiful wedding date that we had? Rav Levi Yitzchak Barditchev ran to the Beis Medrash and said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's true, Shchorani v'Nava, I'm not as beautiful as I used to be, but remember what it was underneath the chuppah, underneath our Sinai. So on one level, there's this idea of Sukkot, of being bin mitzvah all the time, bin mitzvahs and lulav, and all the mitzvahs, being together with Ribono Shalom. Rav Shagar ended the article saying that the sukkah is like that first caravan when you first get married, where you have no budget, right? There's no way you're buying milky, even from Germany. You're not buying any milkies. It's just not happening. You don't have any budget. It's not happening. But you're there and you're together. Sukkot Teshvu Ke'in Teduru. It's that love, the googly eyes. It's the beautiful love and everything, eating, sleeping all together. However, I think the end of Sefer Devarim tells us that there's a deeper part of the relationship also. And this year, it helped me remind by the rain. I haven't been to Hakotel for Sukkot in many years, Baruch Hashem. But the first night here in Yerushalayim, it rained a little bit. All of a sudden there's rain. And then all of a sudden you start learning the sugyas again. Mitzdayer. Exactly, mitzdayer, not mitzdayer. Patim in a-sukkah, not patim in a-sukkah. Many Rishonim say, Teshvu Ke'in Teduru. Can't go in rain, get out of the sukkah. But the Ran and others bring down, no, on the first night, mitzdayer yichayv in a sukkah. As much in the first approach, Sukkot is part of this Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, where we were feeling close, feeling far away through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we're now together, like that newly married couple. However, there's also Sukkot is the end of the Shalosh Regalim. Pesach, we were just formed, Goy Mikerev Goy. To what? Shavuot being the Chuppah, the Nisuin. Which means what? By Sukkot, it means that we have a more developed relationship. Even when there's rain and there's sar. Not like the Hasidic pshat, which is beautiful also. I think they say about the Sanzer Rav, that it was pouring, you would stay there the whole time. Hedjotos. You can't sit in a sukkah it's not a sukkah. He says, what rain? What's that? I'm with the Ribono Shalom. There's no tsar. It's beautiful. But there's a different pshat. The pshat is, mitzdayer chayiv in sukkah. Correct. That's a more developed relationship. It's not only when you're on fire and chol roim et hakolot. It's also yasher koach sheshibart et haluchot. It's also when there's tsar. That's what the Sukkot is coming to teach us. That's what all of Sefer Breishit is coming to teach us. And it's not only about the highs, but it's knowing how to deal with the tsar. That's the relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Torah, with the Am Yisrael, and Yiratzon. That's the big message of how to deal with not only the tzivoy, but to how to deal with the dechiyah. But we should really feel and learn in Kael Yeshurun. We should understand all the different messages, Bezrat Hashem, and have the chizuk in Torah that we have to be able to really feel not only the Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Morasha, that love of the beginning of that newlyweds, but also feeling the nisuin to be raised up and to learn how to forgive and to learn to really be yishurun together with one another.